Here's the key to Acts chapter 15. And I say this because I'm just making some assumptions here, and maybe I shouldn't, but many times there is actually very well-known traditional Western teaching. Notice I didn't say the C word. Which, when it gets to verse 20 of Acts chapter 15, see, these are the only 4 things that Gentiles are not supposed to do. You shall abstain from pollutions of idols, from fornication, from things strangled, and from blood. That's quoted many times by Christian theologians. Theologians, been to seminary, got the P's and the H's, or excuse me, the T's and the H's and the D's behind their name, that don't even bother to read the Greek context, much less the Hebrew context of this, and conclude that the only thing Gentiles have to do is abstain from pollutions of idols, from fornication, from things strangled, and from blood. And that was a decision of James and the council in Acts chapter 15. But the context of the whole thing, I know this is a shock to modern theologians, is in the first 3 or 4 verses of Acts chapter 15. And certain men which came down from Judea taught the brothers, saying, except you be circumcised after the manner of Moses, you cannot be saved. Now, is that what the Torah says? Nope. See, so already Luke, who I believe is the author of Acts, is telling us that this was the accusation. Same thing about Paul. They come to Paul and accuse him of teaching against the law and the custom of Moses. And every time Paul denied it. Every time Paul says, I'm not teaching against not only the laws of Moses, the Torah, I'm not even teaching against the customs of Moses. This is in the book of Acts. So the Tanakh does not teach that circumcision saves you. It does not teach us that. Circumcision is the sign of the covenant. It's not the covenant. The covenant is Abraham believed God and was accounted to him for righteousness. Then everything follows that. Cart before the horse. Then it goes on to say that when they came to Jerusalem, they were received of the church and of the apostles and elders and had declared all things to them that God had done to them. Next page. But there rose up certain sect of the Pharisees which believed, saying that it is needful to circumcise them and to command them to keep the law of Moses. So the whole idea of these guys coming down and saying that keeping the law or being circumcised saves you is not true. And they know that. And so later on, because I don't want to take the time to read the whole thing, but just a couple of verses later, the author Luke is going to say, even our fathers couldn't get into the covenant that way. Even our fathers could not get into the kingdom and the covenant by obeying commandments. Because what Paul said is not new. What Paul said is true. And that is that, well, no, what Brad said, Paul didn't actually say this. There's nothing new in the New Testament. Once again, it's just true. We're learning these things now. Why? Because now we're beginning to learn the hearts of the fathers rather than just information about the fathers. We're learning their hearts now. And that's the focus of this whole thing in the first place. Why? Because that's the way every living thing works. If you have a field and as a matter of fact, how many of you are familiar with the fact that the word Torah comes from the word for the former rains? Okay. The word law. Let's take it upstream. Remember, words are like water. Let's take it downstream where it gets all muddy. Law. Custom, decree. You look it up in the Strong's Concordance, the abstract word law gives you abstract definitions. As a matter of fact, the Strong's sometimes repeats the exact word that you're looking up. You look up the word law and one of the definitions is law. Okay? And so a custom or decree. You just got 2 more abstract definitions of the word that you looked up. You don't really know any more than when you started. So then we realize it comes from the Greek word namas and its various forms. All right? And if you look that up, it's going to tell you the same thing. Now you're going to take it back. You're going to go to the Hebrew part of the Strong's Concordance, all right? And you're going to take it back to the word Torah, right? Torah is not its root. That tav there is just a prefix, okay, that puts it in a certain tense. It's not its root. And then you're going to look that word up, and it's going to say something like law, decree, custom, things of that nature. And you still don't know them any more than when you started. But if you take it back to its root is Yod Resh Hey. Yod Resh Hey. Remember call stem. I do everything in the call stem. Yara. Yara in its stem means to cast forth rain. The casting forth of rain. Sometimes you'll have hit a target, things like that. King James words, hit at a target. But the idea is to cast forth rain. Now let's go back to the field. When you go out in the field, who plants the seed? Does the rain plant the seed? No, the rain only blesses the seed after it's been, or he's been, if I can use that, after he's been planted. So if you plant the seed, that's your salvation. That gets you into the kingdom. That's something, remember it had to go into the ground and die, which technically it doesn't die anyway. A seed, when Yeshua said, in order to produce fruit, the seed has to go into the ground and die. Yeshua is using the biblical definition of die, not our cultural definition of die. If you plant a seed in the ground and it dies, you can't produce from something because it's like dead. Okay? And so in reality, what he was saying, because the idea of death, mut in Hebrew, the idea of death in Hebrew is separation. A separation takes place. It gets translated as the English word death, but actually the source of its life separates from it. So when you take a kernel, a grain, and you put it in the ground, it has a very hard outer shell that cannot be penetrated in the ground. So this hard shell that covers a living embryo. So inside the grain, the kernel, is a living embryo. It's not dead, but it has a hard outer shell to it. So now, depending upon the conditions of the soil, hence the parable of the sower being the most important parable, the conditions of the soil, that over time, water, minerals, sunshine, temperature of the soil will begin to soften up that hard outer shell. Paul calls that the old man of sin. The reason why the new man can't come forth because you're still holding on to the old man of sin. And so that's got to separate. And so when you see the seed, that hard outer shell begins to separate from the living embryo. And now the living embryo, that's called death. But if the seed is dead, if the whole thing is seed, what actually makes it, you can't produce something that's dead. I know that disappoints a lot of people in their Christian songs, so forth, about you can't get life from death. That's the reality. That's what disappoints people. Isn't it because of what Yeshua did, that we have life in him? Well, Yeshua compares it to a seed, remember, growing in the ground. But there's something inside the seed that's still living. And that's what bursts forth from the soil and produces the little tender sprouts, which eventually produces the branches and the leaves and the fruit. And what's in the fruit? The seed. And that's how it works. It goes in cycles. So Yeshua is not saying, when he says it's dead, he's using the biblical definition or the Hebrew definition of death, which means a separation took place, which meant the old man separated from the new man so he could come forth and produce fruit. Because the old man's keeping him from doing that. Okay, I don't know. Oh, yeah, we're doing Yara. And so the farmer goes out and plants the seed. What's he wait for now? Now that's good. I'm going to suggest you planting the seed is good. Will we all agree with that? Farmer goes out and plants the seed, and that is good. But guess what? It's not. It's not very good because if the seed doesn't rise up from the ground and sprout and produce fruit, the seed just dies on the ground. So it's good, but it's not what? It's not tov miod. It's not very good because it's not producing life yet. And so therefore, if you plant the seed but you don't get the rain, eventually the seed dies in the ground. Longer for some than others. Some very quickly, some take a couple thousand years. Really, we have found seeds in Israel. I believe they found one in the ice in the Antarctic that was, now this is their terminology, millions of years old. But they found a 2,000-year-old date seed in Jerusalem. Not too long ago. And they planted that thing and it sprouted fruit. It's producing fruit. So some take a lot longer than others. But either way, if you don't produce rain, if the rain doesn't come down and cause that thing to moisten up in the soil of the ground and the living embryo come through, then that's all for naught. So if you have the seed, but you don't have the rain, you're cursed. However, if you have buckets of rain coming down and there's no seed in the ground, you flood the ground and curse it. Anybody in the field knows that. So if you have the seed but don't have the fruit, you're cursed because that's how the seed propagates, is through the fruit. However, if you have buckets of rain falling down to cause the fruit to produce and you don't have a seed, because the seed is not just to grow other things, the seed in the ground holds the ground together as well. It holds it all together. That's why Yeshua in Colossians 1 verse 17 says, in him all things consist. Which is a Greek word taken back in the Hebrew. It means hold things together. To hold things together. So the seed's not just in the ground to produce more fruit. The ground, the seed and the roots and everything in the ground contributes together to hold everything together. That's why in California, first the fires come through and destroy these things, especially if they're shallow in the ground, like a lot of vegetation is in California. And then what happens next? The floods came. And it floods everything out because there's no vegetation. There's nothing in the ground holding it together anymore. So they had the fires, then they have the floods. Okay, so the word Yarah is the casting forth of the rain. So the farmer waits for the rain to plant the seed? No, to bless the seed once it's been planted. That's why the Bible says, if you obey me, I will bless you, not save you. God's peculiar people in Exodus chapter 19, verse 3, 4, 5, and 6, or verse 6 in particular, are not saved because they're a peculiar people. If you obey me, you will be a peculiar people. Not if you obey me, I will save you. That already happened in the Passover. Remember, they already had the Passover. Now what is he going to do? Take them to Mount Sinai. What do we need Mount Sinai for? We already got saved. Why is he taking them to Mount Sinai? To get the ability to be able to survive the wilderness. Because Israel was not delivered from Egypt by the Torah. Israel was delivered from Egypt by the blood of the Lamb. That's true in Genesis, that's true in Exodus, that's true in every passage from beginning to end. It's the blood of the Lamb that delivered them and redeemed them from the world system. Then they were taken to Mount Sinai. You can't miss the patterns. They're consistent and constant from beginning to end. Does it sound like I'm yelling at you? God, I hope not. Okay. Everybody else in the science areas and the police departments, they all see patterns and they respond to a pattern happening over and over and over again. Just like when I'm talking to somebody, when I'm doing a marriage counseling and I have the man and the woman there, and I come up to the woman because they're having marriage problems. I come up to the woman and I said, how many times you been married, hon? This is my first marriage. And I go up to the man and go, sir, how many times you been married? 12. I see a pattern. I know it's weird. Okay. But you pretty much know where the problem is, don't you? All right. Now it could be the other way around. Don't get me wrong. Okay. But that's the whole idea of, Acts chapter 15, when they held the council. The conclusion of the council was that these brand new baby Gentiles that are just coming into the walk, we're going to require them to abstain from these 4 things so they can come to the synagogue and learn from Moses. Because there's certain things you cannot bring with you into the synagogues in the same way there's certain things that nobody will allow you to come into the church with it either. I'm going to come. I want to learn. I want to learn the church stuff. And when I come to Bible study, I'm going to sacrifice a pig on the table. No, you're not. Okay? You're not going to do those things. When you learn to abstain from sacrificing babies on altars, which is what you did in your Zoroastrian, Gnostic cultures before you came into this walk. See, it's a normal thing to say in order to have fellowship. And then you will learn Moses, the next verse says, in the synagogue. So they didn't pile a bunch of things on them at the beginning. Why? They're babies. One of the best ways to see how the Torah works and how learning and growing works is to see how people grow up. How people go through the stages of life. I'm be willing to bet that most of us in here started out as babies. It's a guess on my part, but I'm pretty close that most of us started out as babies. We didn't go right to adults. And the reason why a mother takes that baby, that 2-month-old or that 3-week-old baby, and holds it in close to her breasts, the reason why she's doing that is to establish a relationship between her and the child. So when someone just comes into something, just like a newborn baby, you establish a relationship first. The baby wants to be able to trust the mother. Baby needs to learn where the source of its food comes from first. So establishes a relationship with the mother so the baby can trust the mother. And the mother needs to trust the baby that it doesn't go, for example, okay? And so That's the reason why we call them babies, okay? Because they're learning things. You don't take a 2-week-old baby that's in your arm and you say, now on Saturday night you can stay out to 10. But all the other days of the week, you got to be home by 8 o'clock. You hear that? Because we don't do that with a child. They didn't do that with these people in Acts chapter 15 either. The conclusion was just have them abstain from these 4 things because murder's not even one of them. So new believers can murder people now because it's not listed in those 4. No, it's got zippity-doo-dah to be what's incumbent upon what Christians obey now. It's to establish a relationship so they can come into the synagogue and we can have fellowship with them and they can learn all these other things in the synagogue.